Welcome to the Rational Review. Today, I got the prison proposal nobody is talking about. What if I told you we could reduce prison overcrowding, save taxpayers billions, give inmates a second chance, and potentially satisfy people on both sides of the criminal justice debate, or on both political sides, all with one policy? Sounds crazy, right? But hear me out, okay? Let me throw out an idea that will probably make people on both the left and the right uncomfortable. What if every person in prison was given another option? Okay, not freedom with no consequences, not a pardon, not having their record erased, an option, a different choice, a chance to permanently leave the United States, voluntarily renounce citizenship, receive relocation assistance, and start over in another country willing to accept them. Before you agree or disagree, hear me out. Because what's interesting about this idea is that it appeals to values from all sides of the political spectrum. Okay, what are prisons actually for? That's the main question. Let's start with that simple question. Ask 10 people and you'll get 10 answers. Okay, some people say punishment, rehabilitation, deterrence, public safety, and some will just say it's a necessary institution. Others believe incarceration is fundamentally wrong. People should be free. Okay, but regardless of your political beliefs, one thing is hard to deny. America spends enormous amounts of money locking people up, okay? And despite that cost, we're still arguing over whether the system works. If you're a criminal justice reformer, you might ask, is it really helping someone to spend 20, 30, 40 years behind bars? Will they actually be rehabilitated? If you're a taxpayer, you might ask, why are we paying for decades of incarceration when there may be cheaper alternatives? If you're a libertarian, you might ask, why shouldn't adults be allowed to make major decisions about their own futures? And if you're focused on public safety, you might ask, if someone permanently leaves the country, how exactly are they going to commit future crimes in American communities? Different groups would support the idea for different reasons, but they could possibly support the same outcome. All right, so now prison overcrowding. That's another problem that many agree with. Overcrowded prisons can create problems for everyone. Taxpayers spend more money, facilities deteriorate faster, prison staff has greater stress, violence becomes more likely, in the systems because there's more people, so more chance of violence. Rehabilitation programs become harder to provide because it's a lot harder to provide for 5,000 instead of five. Resources become stretched thinner and thinner because no one wants to spend money on the jails, on the prisons. For decades, we've argued about how to address overcrowding. Build more prisons, reduce sentences. We got politicians trying to let people out of prison early. Change sentencing laws, expand rehabilitation programs. But, hey, well, if there's another option, every person who voluntarily chooses relocation would be one less prison bed occupied for years or even decades. Regardless of the political ideology, reducing overcrowding is likely something most people can appreciate. So this would give them a second chance at life. And the biggest argument is economic. It's human, because at the heart of this proposal is a simple belief. People can change. At least that's what we say. We tell our children that everyone deserves a second chance. We celebrate stories of redemption. We admire people who overcome terrible mistakes and rebuild their lives. But then we create systems where one decision can define the next 30 years of a person's existence. So here's my question. If we genuinely believe in second chances, Why do we only believe in giving second chances to people after decades of punishment? Why not offer a second chance itself? A new country, a fresh start, a clean slate, a reset, if you will, a chance to leave behind all their old environments, their old influences, old labels, mistakes, start over. Sometimes people just need a second chance. Sometimes they need an entirely different beginning. So if the goal is rehabilitation, we could be more rehabilitative than giving someone, what could be more rehabilitative than giving someone an opportunity to completely rebuild their life somewhere else. So this isn't entirely new. All right. In some ways, this idea is older than modern prisons. Throughout history, many communities didn't have massive prison systems. They lacked the resources to house people for decades. Many societies relied on fines, restitution, exile, banishment, or expulsion from the community. The logic was simple. Membership in a community was a privilege. If someone repeatedly violated the rules of the group, they could lose that privilege. I'm not saying we should simply copy the past, but I do think it's worth asking whether spending decades housing someone in a prison cell is really the only solution available to modern society. In some ways, the idea is older than modern prisons. Throughout history, many communities didn't have massive prison systems. They lacked the resources. Many relied on fines, restitution, exile, banishment. The logic was simple. So if someone repeatedly violated the rules of the group, they would lose the privilege of being part of that group. So I'm not saying that we should just simply kick people out and do exactly what they've done in the past. But if we look at places like Australia, for decades, Britain transported convicts to Australia. Today, Australia is one of the most prosperous and successful countries on earth. Now, before anyone twists my words, I'm not saying Australia succeeded because it received convicts. I'm not saying everyone in Australia descends from criminals. That's obviously not true. What I am saying is this. History challenges the idea that every person society labels as a criminal is permanently incapable of becoming a productive citizen. Many of the people Britain sent away built families, started businesses, worked farms. You can even argue that it's part of the cultural differences or, upbringings and stuff like that that make us different. They help build towns. Over generations, they help build a nation. The lesson isn't that crime doesn't matter. The lesson is that human beings are often more than the worst thing they've ever done. If we believe people are capable of change, then history gives us plenty of examples of people starting over and becoming productive members of society. That doesn't prove my proposal would work. It might fail miserably, but it does challenge the assumption that people who have committed crimes are forever beyond redemption. So the strongest criticism, is it really voluntary? The most serious objection, and is someone facing 23 years, is this actually a free choice? That's a fair question. You have 30 years in prison, and we say, hey, can we relocate you? Renounce your citizenship or relocate you? Is that really a choice? And it's exactly why any serious version of this proposal should include a mandatory cooling off period, or what you might call a homeostasis period. So you don't want someone getting arrested or being sentenced to 30 years in prison, and they're all upset. They're like, this big change, they're going to be in prison for 30 years, and then they're just like, I'll take the deal. No, let them have a little bit of time, get used to it, make sure they calm down and get used to the idea of being in prison, get over the emotional parts of being put in prison and have that choice. So nobody should make this decision overnight. Maybe someone should choose maybe someone chooses the option day, but then they wait 6 months. It could work like that, or maybe a year. During that time, they'd receive like legal counseling, psychological evaluations, certain things. I'd be more for just saying, hey, if you want to take this deal, you can take the deal, but you got to wait 6 months and then sign the paper and you got the deal. The purpose wouldn't be to rush people. And yeah, because you don't want people thinking that they don't have a choice and that you're just forcing people out. The purpose would be to ensure the decision comes from a stable and informed state of mind rather than fear, anger, hopelessness, or impulse. That's what I was talking about, was the impulse. If someone still wants the opportunity after a long period of reflection, then it starts looking a lot more like genuine consent. So they would be consenting, over enough time. You're given 6 months and you still want to make the same decision. That's a consensual agreement. So some people, counter argument to this would be you're just exporting criminals. Some people would say the plan doesn't solve the problem; it simply moves it elsewhere, and that's a reasonable concern. But supporters would argue that the proposal only works if another country voluntarily agrees to participate. No country would be forced to accept anyone. The question isn't whether people would move across borders. Millions already do. The question is whether a structured, voluntary relocation program could produce better outcomes than decades of incarceration. Another counter argument that this isn't real justice. So some victims and their families would likely argue that prison is a part of accountability. They may feel leaving the country is too easy. No, you unalived my family member, and you need to spend 30 years in prison to pay for your crime. So I get that argument. My response to that would be the proposal doesn't eliminate consequences. The individual loses citizenship, leaves their homeland, leaves their friends, family, everything they've ever known, and they start over from scratch. This accepts enormous uncertainty. You're moving to another country you've never been to, probably. You're giving up your whole life. You're starting over. It's not a reward. It's simply a different type of consequence. So whether it's enough is a matter people can honestly disagree about, but I think it would be worth it. So another counter-argument, people would re-offend. Some participants absolutely would. Let's be realistic. Some people would do bad things. Not every person would become a success story. But that's true of every criminal justice system. You can't, even people get out of prison here, they go reoffend sometimes. Well, actually, the reoffending rate is really high. People reoffend after prison. They reoffend after probation. People reoffend after rehabilitation programs. There is no policy with a 0% failure rate. The question isn't whether failures will exist. The question is whether society gets better and results overall get better. So another counterargument, some would say people should serve their sentences, kind of what I was talking about earlier. This is where the debate becomes philosophical. Some people believe punishment has value in itself. Maybe they're right. But then we have to ask, what is the ultimate goal? Punishment or achieving the best result for society? So if someone spends 30 years in prison at the taxpayer's expense, that's just one outcome. If someone becomes a productive citizen somewhere else, that's another outcome. Reasonable people can disagree about which outcome is better, but it's a conversation worth having. So the bigger question that I keep coming back to is, imagine you're facing 35 years in prison. Imagine you're told you'll spend decades of your life behind bars. And then somebody offers you another option. A chance to leave, a chance to start over, a chance to build something new, another chance at life. Because how many people in prison would say, hey, I just messed up. I just need one more chance. Are we really supposed to believe nobody would take that deal? And if many people would take it, maybe the real question isn't whether everyone deserves forgiveness. Maybe the real question is whether society should be willing to offer some people a path forward toward redemption that's different than a prison sentence. Because if we truly believe people can change, then maybe we should be willing to offer more than just, we should be, sorry, we should offer people a second chance. It'd be a second chance at life. So now I want to hear from you. Would you support a completely voluntary program like this? Why or why not? What's the strongest argument against it? And what's the strongest argument for it? Would you limit it to certain crimes? Would you include additional safeguards? Would you make the cooling off period longer? Let me know in the comments. Challenge the idea, defend the idea that you have, or if you're with my idea, defend that, improve the idea. Let's make it better. Because whether or not this proposal is brilliant, flawed, impossible, or somewhere in between, it forces us to ask the question about punishment, freedom, redemption, public safety, prison overcrowding, taxpayer costs, and what a second chance could actually look like. If you enjoyed this discussion, hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video with somebody who completely disagrees with you. Those are usually the most interesting conversation, and who knows? Sometimes the ideas worth thinking about are the ones that make everyone uncomfortable at first. Stay rational.